I just spent 24 hours in the gothic horror story that is Cheryl Blossom's life.
Sup everyone, welcome back to another episode of What Happened. Now I'm about to dive into episode 5 of Riverdale, Heart of Darkness, and it is a doozy. I have to apologize right now if I sound stuffy. I have allergies right now and they're really acting up. In this episode, we get to see a new side of a character, a new suspect emerges, and there may just be a parent more evil than Alice Cooper in town. Shocking. I know, but let's get started on the big reveals. So the B plot of this episode, or maybe even the C plot, is Archie's struggle with his love between football and music. We end up seeing him bond with one of the pussycats, Valerie, who tries to get him some help with his music. All the while, Archie and Reggie are both up for team captain of the football team. But unfortunately, it seems like all Archie's shirtless boxing isn't helping much since Reggie seems to keep kicking his ass in practice. Ultimately, Archie is offered the captain position, but he turns it down because he says the team deserves someone who can give their all and all their passion to football, and he can't because he's torn between his love of music and football, and music's his real passion. He's basically just using football to get a scholarship so he can study music. Now the other subplot, let's talk about Hermione Lodge and Fred. As we learned in the last episode, Hermione's in some trouble with the Southside Serpents because Hiram didn't pay him enough money. Sadly, he's in jail, so it looks like things are going to be taken out on Hermione. While she's at work one night, really late at Pop's, she hears the door open, but when she goes to the restaurant floor, the only thing in sight is a box in the middle of the floor. Yep, a snake! I think we can definitely take that as a message from the Southside Serpents, and it's probably not a good sign. So instead of calling the police, Hermione calls Fred, who thinks it's kind of awkward, especially after earlier in the episode he thought their drive-in escapade was a date when it wasn't. Hermione reveals that she called Fred because she doesn't trust the police, or half the people in this town. Amen, sister. And she tells Fred that basically Hiram owes the Southside Serpents money, and they're in trouble. Later on, Fred ends up offering Hermione that bookkeeping job that I think she wanted back in the first episode at his construction business. And then we also see Hermione sit down with Veronica, and it seems like she's going to tell her something. I'm guessing it's about the trouble that they're in, or this incident, because who knows, maybe the Southside Serpents will end up going after Veronica too. The rest of the big reveals come courtesy of the Coopers and the Blossoms, and so much happened that I honestly don't even know where to start. So I'm going to start with Cheryl Blossom. As it's introduced at the beginning of the episode, this family lives in the creepiest house in Riverdale, which is called Thornhill, and it comes complete with its own graveyard. Yeah, not weird at all. We begin the episode with Cheryl having a nightmare. When she wakes up, Mrs. Blossom is right there to say,
I told you, Cheryl. No more sleeping in Jason's bed.
As Mrs. Blossom then tells Cheryl that she can't speak at the memorial for Jason because she's scared that whatever comes out of Cheryl's mouth will humiliate the family. That is just cruel. And the next day at school, Cheryl goes and hands out invitations to Jason's memorial pretty much to everyone. And Cheryl learns later in the episode it's because her family thinks that pretty much everybody in town is like a suspect, so they've invited them all so they can have them all in the same room so they can keep an eye out for the murderer. Now, after handing out these invitations, Veronica tells Cheryl that she wants them to try to be friends. She wants them to bury the hatchet, and if they can't be friends, at least maybe frenemies. So Cheryl decides to reciprocate and invites Veronica over for a sleepover the night before the memorial. Now, of course, when you think of a sleepover, you're thinking, hey, a lot of people, and that's what Veronica's thinking, except to her surprise, she's the only one at the sleepover, and she must endure the dinner party from hell with Mr. and Mrs. Blossom, and who I'm assuming is Grandma Blossom. Now, as the dinner progresses, the Blossom begin to kind of take digs at Veronica and her family, to which I think she handles very well, and then Cheryl just kind of says what we're all thinking.
There are worse things in prison.
Like this dinner party.
What did you say?
The takeaway from this dinner, Mrs. Blossom blames Cheryl for pretty much everything, including rowing Jason to his death. Now, after dinner, Cheryl and Veronica have some more bonding time as they awkwardly look at pictures of Jason, which is totally not weird at all. And that's when Veronica asks why she's the only one at this sleepover, and Cheryl responds,
That night at the pep rally, after I had my panic attack, you helped me. Not them.
Okay, I'm kind of liking this new side of Cheryl. She doesn't seem to be putting on her hoity-toity act like normal, and is being real and vulnerable. and she's really bonding with Veronica. So Veronica then asks Cheryl why she wants to speak at Jason's memorial, and she says it's because she wants to say she's sorry, and she wants to clear the air, and that she thinks that Jason deserved a better family than what he got. So Veronica says she's going to help Cheryl kind of hijack this memorial service so that Cheryl can give her speech, and she says, you know what? Just let the parents do the worst to you they can. Let's just go do this and see what happens. Little does she know, though, just what the worst could be, according to Cheryl.
Let Penelope and Clifford Blossom do their worst.
Oh, they will. They'll kill me.
Shit, that's intense. Looks like Alice Cooper has lost her throne as the most evil parent in Riverdale. So fast forwarding to the memorial, after an awkward moment between Archie and Mrs. Blossom.
You're so much like him. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Blossom just keeps proving to be creepy and evil. Cheryl emerges from her room in the same white dress she wore the day that she and Jason kind of parted ways the last time they saw each other. She explains that Jason was like the best brother ever and how he would do anything to protect her. She then tells this story about how she always wanted separate birthday parties, but Jason one year insisted that they have a joint party. Cheryl later learned it was because no one wanted to go to her party and Jason didn't want her to find out and be upset. She then says that he always protected her and she wished she could have protected him in the same way and that she and everyone failed him. Now after this speech, of course, Mrs. Blossom is not happy with Cheryl one bit. And she is literally raging mad. So she pulls Cheryl into another room and tells her that, this is it for you, basically. There's going to be no more river vixens, and if she could, she would send Cheryl off to a boarding school in Europe that night. However, she says no one will have Cheryl, which is totally hurtful. Now, as all this is happening, we see Veronica standing in the doorway, so she's seeing all of this happen. But that's where we leave these three. So hopefully it'll continue into the next episode. We kind of see what happened there. Now let's move on to Betty and Jughead, who help us learn more about what happened between Polly and Jason. But first, I've been seeing a lot of people saying that there's some stuff that's leaked about Betty and Jughead and a kiss maybe because of paparazzi pictures from set or something. I don't know when that'll come up in the season, but it seems like in tonight's episode that seed is planted. We kind of see the beginning of these sparks fly. So take a look.
The best I could do.
Jughead and Betty team up in the episode Scooby-Doo style to track down some clues about who murdered Jason Blossom. The two, along with Kevin, recreate Sheriff Keller's murder board that's been destroyed, and we learn that pretty much everything has been stolen, including interviews and evidence. In order to help the case and get more information about Jason, Betty decides to do a public service and go on a date with this guy named Trev, who was on the water polo team with Jason. He reveals that a few months ago, Jason started to kind of act weird and secretive, and he ended up starting to change a few weeks after dating Polly, and he started selling all his stuff, and he heard that Jason was also selling drugs. So basically, when Jason and Polly started dating, he began to change. So when Betty goes home after this, she runs into her dad, who's working on the car, and she brings up Polly, and she wants to know why Mrs. Cooper shuts down every time she asks her about Polly. Betty just wants answers about her sister because she loves her sister and her sister's gone. Mr. Cooper explains that Jason and Polly ended up having a fight, but he doesn't know what it was about, but it left Polly devastated. So he came home from work one day and heard water running upstairs, and when he knocked on the door, he got no answer. So he kicked the door down and he found Polly trying to kill herself, and so they sent her away in order to keep her from committing suicide. Betty ends up relaying this information to Jughead and adds that her dad won't even let her call Polly because she was doing well for a while, but after learning about Jason's death, she had a downward spiral again. Meanwhile, Jughead's just trying to figure out why a rich kid like Jason would want to sell drugs, and perhaps maybe he wasn't running from his parents, but maybe he was running from drug dealers. But if in fact he was running from his family or his parents, what makes his parents so evil? Well, the only way to figure that out is to get some clues into Jason and who he is, so they decide that during the memorial, they're going to break into Jason's room. When Betty and Jughead go into Jason's room, first they have a bone to pick with him. They don't close the door. If you're trying to sneak in somewhere, close the door so it looks like how it was before and you don't draw attention to yourself. Anyways, once they go into the room, that's when they get this big surprise.
I'm so sorry. We were just leaving.
Now, as creepy as Grandma seems to be, she is actually pretty helpful and helps reveal some big news. She's pretty blind, so she can't really tell who's who, but she thinks Betty is Polly, and she tells her to come over, and so Betty plays along because she wants some information. She wants to see what Grandma's going to spill. Grandma says that Jason and Polly were engaged, and that she gave Polly a ring that's been in the Blossom family for generations, and that if Mrs. Blossom ever found out, she'd probably come snip the ring right off of her finger. Ouch. Tack that on to what Cheryl said about her parents probably murdering her. Yeah, I think that, they could have something to do with Jason's murder. Grandma also says that Jason and Polly's wedding was like the only thing she was still living for. So it seems like Grandma's the only one who approved of this coupling. With all this new information, when Betty returns home, she tells her dad about the engagement, but he actually already knew about it. And then he reveals why the Blossoms and the Coopers have so much hatred towards each other. Turns out, Betty's great-grandfather used to be in the maple syrup business with Cheryl's great-grandfather. One day, great-granddad Blossom decided he didn't want to share the earnings anymore and killed great-granddad Cooper in cold blood. So all these people seem to be capable of murder right now. And because of this, Mr. Cooper blames the Blossoms for stealing their family's livelihood, and he blames Jason for making Polly sick. Now, Betty's basically learning that her dad is just full of lies, and she begins to believe that there are definitely more lies to be uncovered regarding Jason and Polly. She kind of even begins to wonder how far her dad would go to protect Polly. And she says that whoever stole the evidence wasn't at the drive-in the night, and she has this revelation.
Jughead, whoever broke into Sheriff Keller's house and stole all his evidence wasn't at the drive-in. My dad wasn't at the drive-in.
Yep, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper have now been officially added to that suspect list. And Jughead says the only way they can really get more information is they need to talk to Polly. I know that's a lot. So we learned basically that Jason and Polly were engaged. Polly tried to kill herself. Mr. Cooper stole the evidence. Hermione Lodge is in trouble. The Blossoms and the Coopers hate each other over murder of the great-grandfathers. And the Blossom parents are pretty much evil. Now, one thing I definitely have to say about this episode is that Madeleine Pesch, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she plays Cheryl, did an amazing job in this episode. I loved being able to see a different side of Cheryl that didn't seem like it was putting on a show, and we got to see why she is the way she is. She's basically treated horribly at home, and it feels like Jason was the golden child, and she was kind of the mistake. And while it shouldn't justify her being a bully and a bitch, it does give insight into why she is the way she is and why she puts on that mean girl facade, like trying to show a tough skin because she doesn't want everyone to know what's happening with her at home. I kind of hope that we continue to see this side of Cheryl, like that she doesn't go back to full mean girl mode. Now that we know a little bit more about Polly and Jason, it looks like next week we're going to finally get to meet Polly. So let's check out the promo for the next episode.
When I was up there, I just froze.
What's happening?
He's choking.
There's gotta be a reason my mom and dad don't want me to see Polly.
This whole car is a crime scene.
Did you want to say something to me?
I quit.
You ginger Judas.
Did you kill Jason Blossom?
Alright, so Archie gets stage fright. Jughead and Betty find a car that seems to have Jason's stuff in it. We meet Polly, and Betty just flat out asks her dad if he killed Jason Blossom. We're only halfway through the season, and things are starting to get real intense. But now, it's that time again. I want to know all your theories and comments on the episode below or on social media. Do you think Betty's dad really had something to do with this murder, or is that too obvious? What's going to happen when Alice Cooper returns? And what do you think about that spark between Betty and Jughead? Do you have any new suspects in mind? And also let me know if I missed any big things or little clues in this episode. I know sometimes I miss things that you guys point out, like in the last recap, I completely forgot about the story about Jughead saying that him and his little sister used to sneak into the drive-in with their parent, and then I stupidly asked, like, who was in the picture with Jughead? Well, of course it was his sister. So I missed that last episode. Also, be sure to check out my other recaps from this week right over here and subscribe so you don't miss one, because I'll be back next week with a recap of the next episode of Riverdale, but it actually might be a little late, probably on Saturday because I'm going to be out of town on Thursday, but I will definitely still try to do one. But until then, I'm Lisa, and I'll see you next time.